You have to understand how things are up here.
Hey guys, it's your ghost John and welcome to What Is It, one of our 2 mini episodes that come out every week. Please also consider tuning into our hour-long episodes that come out every Wednesday, and don't forget to Google the 21CD podcast and follow us everywhere, and to check out 21cdstudios.com for updates, merch, and links to our other places. Now let's get into it. The Fae, they're also known as the Fairies, and they are a diverse group of supernatural beings found in the folklore and mythology of various cultures, particularly in Celtic traditions from Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and other parts of the British Isles. The term Fae encompasses this wide range of what we now call magical creatures, from these tiny little winged sprites to more powerful human-sized beings with these formidable and powerful abilities. And they're often associated with nature and the liminal space between worlds. The Fae are incredibly diverse, and there isn't really a single uniform description that fits all of them. They range from these small, delicate beings with wings like Tinkerbell to these tall, elegant entities that resemble humans but have these powerful abilities and this kind of otherworldly presence like the elves from Lord of the Rings. And in some traditions, the Fae are divided into 2 groups. We got the Seelie Court, and that's the benevolent and these neutral fairies. And then we've got the Unseelie Court, and they're these malevolent trickster fairies. And the Seelie Court is typically seen as more friendly or helpful to humans, whereas the Unseelie Court is hostile and dangerous. And both can be unpredictable, though. Their actions often depend on their own whims and any sort of rules that they're bound by. The Fae are deeply connected to nature and the natural world, as you can imagine, and they're often considered guardians or spirits of specific natural elements like forest or trees or stones, rivers. Many Fae are associated with particular places like a fairy ring, which is a circle of mushrooms, or a grove of tree or a spring or something. They're believed to possess powers tied to these natural settings, like the elf towers in Iceland, and their strength might wane or wax depending on their proximity to their home. Some fairies are associated with special seasons like summer and winter, or elements even, like earth or air. And water fairies, such as the Celkies or the Kelpies, 2 different things from Scottish folklore, are linked to bodies of water, and they often have powers connected to that element. The Fae are known for these powers, these strange abilities, which can range from shape-shifting and invisibility and flight to things more massive, like manipulating time or casting these spells that change the way we view the world around us. Some fairies can enchant humans, making them dance until they collapse from exhaustion or forget their former lives even. And they can bless and curse and grant boons or cause mischief. But one of their most famous abilities is this use of a spell, I guess you could call it, called glamour. And it's this type of enchantment or illusion that they can use to alter perceptions and make things appear differently than they are. Glamour can make the Fae appear beautiful or ugly, or change shape or size, or even render them invisible. And it can also change how we perceive the physical world around them. The Fae are often characterized by their sort of ambiguity and capricious nature, and they don't always adhere to these human notions of what's good and evil. They've got their own rules. They operate according to their own codes of conduct, and this makes them very unpredictable, obviously. Sometimes helpful or benevolent, and other times just downright cruel. Many Fae are known for their love of this trickery and games, and they might play these tricks on humans just for their amusement and lead them astray into the woods to their doom. There could be one of the explanations for your missing 411 right there. However, they're also known to make deals or bargains, often with tricky or unexpected terms. It is said that one should be extremely cautious when making a deal with the Fae because they often follow the letter of the law, but not necessarily the spirit. But despite these powers, the Fae also have weaknesses. They're often said to have an aversion to iron, which can harm or repel them. In many stories, carrying a piece of iron, such as a nail or a horseshoe, provides protection against them. And one of you guys commented on one of my videos recently about how I should bring an iron horseshoe to Iceland. So shout out to you for that. Other weaknesses or dislikes that fairies might have include salt and bread or certain herbs like St. John's wort, maybe even Christian symbols like the cross. And the Fae are also bound by specific rules or customs, just as we are. It's just they have their own way of doing things. If a human says thank you to a Fae, it's believed to be an insult, as they consider gratitude a form of debt or weakness. Additionally, they're often obliged to fulfill bargains or follow rules of hospitality. But where did these things come from, right? The origins of the Fae can be traced back to ancient Celtic mythology and other pre-Christian beliefs in the British Isles and Northern Europe. And in these traditions, fairies were often seen as nature spirits or gods or even demigods who inhabited the land, the sea, and the air. And the Tuatha De Danann, which was a race of godlike beings in Irish mythology, they're sometimes considered the ancestors of the Fae, or some kind of type of high Fae. And the Fae may have evolved from older beliefs in some type of animism, where every natural object, such as trees and rivers, hills, cliffs, whatever, was thought to have its own spirit. The Fae in this context would be these personified spirits of these elements. But the real idea is there's something that lives in the hill. The hill is not living. With the arrival of Christianity in Europe, many pre-Christian beliefs were reinterpreted or just stolen altogether, right? In Christian folklore, fairies were sometimes seen as fallen angels, beings who were neither wholly evil nor wholly good, and who were inhabiting, a liminal space between heaven and hell. And they were cast out of heaven during Lucifer's rebellion, but they didn't fall far enough to reach hell, so they just ended up here on earth with us, dwelling in the sort of more wild, untouched places. In other Christian interpretations, though, the Fae were also thought of as demonic beings or spirits that could lead people astray from their faith. And this was especially prevalent in the medieval ages, when anything associated with the old pagan religions was seen as suspect or dangerous. But of course, with all things, over time, the concept of the Fae did evolve, and it blended influences from all sorts of cultures and traditions, from the Celtic in the north all the way to the Native American in the New World. All these local folklores and superstitions, they all contribute to what the Fae are today. And there are so many different types of Fae that it's impossible to probably put them all in one episode. That indeed, the discussion of what makes a cryptid a Fae is also a great question to ask, because many of the things that we think of as a specific cryptid, such as Mothman or Dogman, whatever, Bigfoot, they could be thought of as Fae as well. But a few that maybe you haven't heard of, maybe a couple you have. We have the Banshee from the Irish folklore. It's a fairy known for her wailing or her screaming. We've probably all heard of the Banshee. And she foretells the death of family members. and she's usually depicted as a woman with long flowing hair dressed in white or gray. Then we have the Selkies. These are those Scottish and Irish fairies we mentioned earlier, and they live as seals in the sea, and they can shed their skins to become human. They're often associated with stories of love and loss and transformation, where a human steals the Selkie's skin to force them to remain on land. Okay. And then there's the Brownies, which are these small household fairies in Scottish and English folklore who help with the household chores in exchange for like small offerings of food or drink, like cream or bread. And they're typically benign but can become mischievous or just leave altogether if they feel disrespected. Then there's the leprechauns. We've all heard of the leprechauns, type of solitary fairy in Irish folklore, often depicted as some kind of small bearded little man who makes shoes and possesses hidden gold. Leprechauns are tricksters, of course, who will try to outwit anybody attempting to steal their treasure. Then we've got the pixies. They're those mischievous and playful little fairies from English and Cornish folklore, and they are these like small winged creatures who enjoy leading travelers astray. They're the reason for all your missing 411 stories right there. And they're known for their love of dancing and music, and they typically are less threatening than other fae. Then my personal favorite, the Kelpie, which is just the coolest fae in my opinion. And it's this shape-shifting water spirit from Scottish folklore that manifests as a horse near the river or a loch, and it'll lure humans onto its back, and then it will bolt off into the water and just plummet deep into the depths until it opens a portal where the victim will then be basically kidnapped, and it's his or her life force just like drained from. It's insane. It's awesome though. But of course, then we also have the goblins and the red caps. We can't forget them, and they're those more malevolent types of fae associated with like mischief and theft and petty violence. And the red caps in particular are murderous fairies though, who dwell in ruins or castles and dye their caps in the blood of their victims. The Fae are best understood as morally ambiguous beings. They are capable of both kindness and cruelty, generosity and trickery, and it really depends on the situation and what kind of mood they're in, and if they're feeling a certain type of way. Their behavior is often capricious, reflecting their sort of otherworldly nature and this independence from the way that humans do things. The most interesting to me is the neutral fairies, and they're these fae that they're not good or bad, but they sort of just do whatever they want. They just act according to their own interests and desires and their aspirations, and they might help humans or they could just hurt them depending on however they feel, and whether they feel disrespected, bored, curious. Maybe they just want to use you for a little amusement. They might play tricks on humans just for fun. The Fae kind of operate according to their own set of rules. They're on their own plane, so they have their own way of doing things, their customs and their ethics, and those things don't always align with human standards. And though they might share certain attributes, others might be completely opposite. They might have a strong sense of honor or obligation to like fulfill a promise, but they also might interpret promises in ways that benefit them and just confound humans. And they might feel justified in punishing somebody who disrespects or fails to honor their customs, even if the offense seems minor to human standards. And the Fae are bound by these bizarre rules of hospitality and respect as well. If you invite a Fae into your home, or cross into its territory, you often have to follow certain protocols, like offer them some food or drink, and breaking these rules could lead to bad things happening to you. Conversely, if humans respect their customs and avoid offending them, they might be rewarded with some kind of blessing or protection. Some interpretations just view the Fae as trickster figures who challenge human perceptions and their moral certainties or behavior. By leading people astray or setting difficult tasks, they force humans to kind of confront their own limitations, their own fears and moral decisions. And in this sense, they can kind of be seen as teachers or mirrors, you know, like your mirror self, reflecting back human nature in ways that are unexpected or challenging. So whenever I think about these cryptids, I ask myself, you know, is this created by gods? Because I'm a believer. So were the Fae created by God? We got to look at all these different cultural and religious and folkloric interpretations. If they weren't created by God, who would they be created by? I know that's the obvious second question, but what I really mean is, are they an intentional race? Is there something special about them? Do they have their own Bible? You know, like that kind of stuff. In pre-Christian Celtic, Norse, and other European mythologies, the Fae are often considered nature spirits, like deities or descendants of ancient gods. They're not explicitly created by a single monotheistic god, but they're instead thought to have always existed as part of the natural world. So in that way, even though they are created by God, they wouldn't be created by God. They'd be created by these Anunnaki or whatever it was that fell from the heavens during the outcast. And in these traditions, the Fae are often seen as like these spirits of the land. And they might be viewed as the descendants of these gods, like the Tuatha De Danann from Irish mythology, or as spirits of ancestors imbued with sort of this like power or presence in the natural world, like the Nephilim, things like that. And with the spread of Christianity and these older beliefs about the Fae, they were all reinterpreted to fit this new religious framework. We've seen this happen 1,000 times with the Catholic Church just sort of taking from the religions that they conquered. Different Christian traditions offer various explanations for the origins of the Fae. They're fallen angels. One of the weirder ones is the souls of the unbaptized. There's this explanation that sort of suggests that the Fae are the souls of unbaptized children, or those who died without receiving the sacraments, so they're just sort of doomed to wander the earth forever. And that idea kind of reflects the medieval beliefs about limbo or the afterlife for those who don't really neatly fit into the category of saved or not. You know, and then of course, like we said earlier, they could be demons, and modern interpretations of the Fae are just archetypal figures representing different aspects of your own human psyche, such as, you know, the people that live in your head, the characters that live in your head. You've got the trickster, the wise old woman, the seductive temptress. In this view, they're kind of created by human imagination and culture. They embody all of our fears, and that's sort of how modern interpretations of the Fae play out. But, you know, going back to their creation, where they came from, it's a pretty complex question to ask, because they've sort of always been here in our stories. And they seem to be this sort of blend of pagan and Christian and modern beliefs at this point. So whether viewed as ancient or nature spirits, fallen angels, or archetypal symbols, the Fae remain this really captivating part of folklore and myth. And we've got a couple really intriguing stories before I let you guys get out of here today about some of the wars that we have actually, as humans, have actually fought with the Fae, which I thought was just really bizarre. I didn't realize that the humans had fought literal wars and battles with the Fae so often in the past, but so frequently, I should say. But in Scandinavian folklore, there are many tales of this conflict with the Fae, and they often become disputes over land and resources. And one story involves this elfin hill. So basically, a wealthy farmer decides to expand his fields, and he begins to dig up this elfin hill, and it disturbs the Fae who live there. So the Fae retaliate by causing accidents and sickness and all sorts of weird stuff to happen on his farm. And this conflict gets worse and worse when the farmer just refuses to stop. So in some versions, the elves actually use their power to destroy his farm, and the farmer has to seek help from this like wise old woman, this seer, who advises him to make peace with the Fae by leaving offerings or just respecting their territory and stopping his work. And that's eventually what the farmer has to do, because the Fae are not willing to accept his offerings, and they want him to stop attacking their hill. There's also this Battle of Moytura, which is bizarre, and it's one of the most famous conflicts in Irish mythology, which can kind of be seen as this war between this human and Fae-like race, the humans and the Fae-like race. And the mythological battle kind of involves the Tuatha Dé Danann, which is this race that we've been talking about off and on. It's this supernatural race of gods and beings that are considered the original Fae of Ireland. They basically waged war against the humans and the Fomorians, which was another race. So the Tuatha Dé Danann are described as these powerful beings with very powerful abilities who come to Ireland, and they start to engage in battle with the Fir Bolg, which is a human tribe here in Ireland. And they are going to war for control of the island. And later they fight the Fomorians that I just mentioned, and they're a much like darker race. And in these conflicts, the Tuatha Dé Danann, they use these weird powers and supernatural weapons, and just they're very cunning, and they use all these powers to win. But they're not known as purely Fae in the way that the term is used in later folklore. They are kind of like the Irish Anunnaki. The Tuatha Dé Danann, they share many characteristics with the Fae. All of the immortality and the magical things, the association with nature, all that kind of stuff. But after they are defeated in a later conflict by this human tribe called the Milesians, the Tuatha Dé Danann retreat into the hills and the mounds of Ireland, and they become the AOC, the people of the mounds, who are often identified as Fae in later folklore. So we can see how they sort of fathered the Fae, and that's kind of how they connect. And it's a really interesting story, in my opinion, about the origin of this strange mirror race, mirror species that live alongside us that we just can't always see. In Welsh and Cornish folklore, there are lots of stories of fairy raids, which are like battles between human communities and the fairies. And these tales often begin with human sort of encroachment upon the Fae territory by building something on their land or cutting down trees or farming, whatever. And the Fae will actually retaliate with night raids, and they will cast spells and cause mischief and harm the human community. And these stories of fairies extend to like attacking farms and turning the milk sour, stealing livestock, causing all sorts of accidents. And sometimes the humans will counter raid, which usually ends badly. And in these stories, the humans find that their weapons just can't even harm the Fae. And the Fae are just disappearing and changing shape, using all sorts of weird powers to protect themselves. And the humans inevitably just have to make peace with them. It's really wild. And there's so many stories that I'm just don't have the time to tell all of them. But, you know, all this talk about the Fae in Europe and stuff, I had to see, are there any real credible tales from North America? And sure enough, I found that the little people bear some striking similarities. So indigenous Cherokee stories speak about these little people who are small magical beings that live in the mountains and the forests of the Appalachians, and they are often described as benevolent but can be mischievous or vengeful if they're disrespected or disturbed. And they're known to help those who are lost in the woods or in need, but they could also punish you and lead you astray or even attack you. And in this way, they share many characteristics with the European fairies, and they also possess these abilities to become invisible. They love music and dance. They have this desire for secrecy. So a lot of people consider these little people to actually be fae. But there's other fae in the Appalachians as well. In some stories, there's these mountain fairies, and they're depicted as protecting specific natural sites like springs or old growth forests or ancient trees. And there are accounts of people who, after disturbing a site that is believed to be home to these fairies, suffered very bizarre misfortunes and unexplained accidents. So who knows? But it does appear like these fairies are worldwide, and that really just furthers my belief that this could be some kind of parallel race. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. Remember, guys, don't drink the water and question everything.